I have been doing landscape photography for over 12 years now. And over that time, I have used a lot of different cameras from a lot of different brands. And I've also used a ton of different lenses from a ton of different brands. For this video, I wanted to do something a little different than we normally do on the Some of It channel, where we're talking about new gear we've acquired or things we're testing out, things of that nature. And I'm going to look back over my career and I'm going to rank the top 10 lenses that I've used for landscape photography that are my favorite. So before we start with the list, so we're going to go from 10 to 1. To me, what makes a great lens, there's a lot of things that make a great lens. There's sharpness. I mean, that's a huge, important deal. Lenses like this 20 to 70 on the A7R5 here, crazy sharp. But I'm also looking at lenses that have a great character, that have a good rendering and color. I also love the design of the lens, how fun it was to use the lens. And then ultimately the things that I captured with that lens, like what did I make? What were the photos that I made with that lens that are either meaningful to me or just some of my favorite shots? It's a lot of different criteria go into a favorite lens, but it's not just a list of the sharpest, because like there are lenses on here that are not the sharpest, quote unquote. Maybe at some point I should make a video about the sharpest lenses that I've ever used, but this is just my favorite. The lenses I have the fondest memory of using. Unfortunately, most of these lenses I don't have anymore. So, that's kind of sad. And some of them I may be getting again in the future. Just the nature of our business and our work. I just, haven't been able to hold on to them all. So yeah, let's jump in with number 10. Number 10 is the Nikon 14 to 24 2.8G lens, the DSLR lens. And when I got that lens, it felt like a huge deal. Like it was my first true ultra wide lens that was a professional ultra wide lens. And it kind of blew my mind photographing the world at 14 millimeters like that. And I'm not a big wide angle photographer. You're going to notice from this list that there's not as many wide angle lenses as you might expect for a landscape photographer. But I really loved using that lens, and it was just so cool. It looked cool, it felt cool, and I used that lens on the D850, and then I adapted it later onto the Nikon Z7. My first foray into true professional wide angle lenses. So the Nikon 14 to 24G is number 10. Number 9 is the Sony 85 1.4 G Master lens. This is a funny lens to have on a landscape photography list, but I just loved using this lens. Now, this lens is an example of maybe a lens that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go out and buy. The autofocus isn't very good. It's big and it's heavy for a landscape lens, but man, I just love how this lens rendered. I tried it out for landscape photography. I bought it for kind of different purposes. Was doing, a lot of kind of client work at the time. And I tried it out for landscape photography and fell in love with how this lens renders. I feel like of all of Sony's lenses I've ever used, this one has the most character. I feel like Sony baked a lot of character into this lens, and I enjoy using 85 for landscape, and it's kind of a fun experience using that big, kind of thick prime for landscape photography. And yeah, and a lot of my work with it was panoramas. So we have a video on the channel all about how and why we use 85 for landscape photography. Maybe you should check out. Number 8, the 24 to 105 f4 from Canon, the old DSLR lens. I don't know how many people watching this video remember, but back in the the 2000s and the mid 2010s, L lenses were a huge deal. The red ring, it feels like it's not as big of a deal as it was back then. People literally bought fake red rings to put on lenses because it was just it was a big deal to get an L lens. And when I got the 24-105 f4, I really thought I had arrived as a photographer. Now, looking back, like, you can't really beat a standard f4 zoom like that. Whether it's the 24-105 from whatever brand, 24-120, they come in various focal lenses, in focal ranges, but you can't beat that lens for versatility for landscape photography. And I really saw an explosion of growth in my time period of using that lens. I used it for quite a few years. I used it on Canon, I adapted it over to Sony, and it was a good lens to really cut my teeth as a landscape photographer, and I'm always going to look back on it with fond memories. Number 7 is another G Master Prime from Sony, and that's the 24-1.4. To me, few lenses actually are closer to quote-unquote perfection as this lens. It's the perfect size, it's the perfect weight. I feel like it renders really well for 24. It's valuable as a prime. This lens is just, there's few lenses that I've ever had that I've enjoyed using more than this lens. And I used it a lot for astrophotography, and it is absolutely amazing for astrophotography. And 24 is actually one of my favorite wider angle focal lengths. I feel like 24, it's kind of the place where wide angle and ultra wide meet, and my philosophy in how I'm composing changes right around 24. So, when I'm 24 and tighter, I'm really looking for the slice of the world that I'm trying to capture and compose. When you go wider than 24, you really are in a lot of ways taking the whole world or everything that you can see and trying to configure it in a way that is aesthetically pleasing. It's a whole different kind of mindset when you're shooting ultra wide. And 24 sits right on that line, and I love shooting that focal length. This is hands down the best 24 prime that I've ever used. And this lens is an amazing lens. What can I say? You can't go wrong as having that be a prime a G Master Prime that you get if you're a Sony shooter. Number 6. This is another one that is kind of amazing that has made this list, and that is the 180-400 f4 from Nikon. This is a wild lens to use for landscape photography, but ever since it came out in 2018, I kind of had a dream of trying this lens out for landscape photography because it may be huge, it may be heavy, but it's no compromises image quality for telephoto landscapes. And a huge part of my portfolio is telephoto landscapes. Telephoto landscape photography is, one of the main ways that I shoot. And the 180-400 is kind of the peak of that for image quality. Now, it's absolutely gigantic, but it's also really fun. Shooting a huge lens like that from a tripod. I only got to use it for one trip. We took it to the Alabama Hills and Death Valley in California, and it was a blast getting to use that lens. Obviously, I can't make that lens part of my main kit. It's enormous and enormously expensive, but I will always treasure the images that I captured with it because the image quality is just so good. All right, so number 5 on our list is one of the few lenses actually it's the only lens on this list that's still in the Summit Bid inventory. And it's also the only lens you may never have heard of, and that is the Tokina 35-70 2.8. It is an old FD mount lens for film cameras, Canon film cameras. And I purchased this lens on eBay. I saw it and I was like, you know what? I kind of wanted a 2.8 lens very early on in my landscape photography career. And it's a, fully manual focus, kind of funny little zoom lens, but I took some real pictures that I am fond of with this lens. I did a lot of climbing with this lens, and I captured some images in Rocky Mountain National Park in some very extreme weather conditions with this lens that I'm very proud of. And this little lens has a ton of character, and you're going to find that with a lot of film photography, old film lenses, is that they're not necessarily the sharpest. And this lens, it's certainly not, it's not bad, but it's, you know, it's not as sharp as a modern lens by any means, but has a ton of character, has really cool colors and a richness to it. I'm actually looking to shoot a little bit more with it in the coming weeks, just to kind of reacquaint myself with it and do some cool projects. So, but yeah, this is the Tokina 35-70 2.8 lens adapted. I've always used it adapted onto Sony cameras. So, okay, number 4, and this is a lens that really earned its spot on this list because I didn't even buy this lens to shoot landscape photography with. I was doing a lot of real estate photo and video at the time, and it was kind of a lens I was like, ugh, you know, I guess I need it, but I don't really want it all that much. And that is the Sony 16-35 2.8 G Master. Like I said earlier in this video, I'm not a huge wide angle guy, ultra wide angle guy, but gosh darn it, this lens, I've wound up using it so much for so many shots that I'm very fond of. I took this lens to Mount Rainier National Park. I shot Astro at Chasm Lake twice with this lens, and I've just wound up doing a ton of shooting with this lens that I didn't even particularly want to buy all that much. And it's the first lens on here that I really am like, oh, I kind of wish I still had. I just had so much shooting experiences with that lens. And there's a new one for Sony now that I probably should try out at some point. It's smaller, lighter, sharper, but this lens was always so sharp, and it just had a really great render to it. It was the first G Master that I feel like, the G Master zoom, that you're like, okay, Sony's gonna get it together, because the 24-70 and 7200 that came out ahead of it were just okay lenses. I used both of those lenses, and this one of that Trinity, that original Trinity, was really the best. So yeah, the 16-35 G Master, like I said, a phenomenal lens, and a lens I'm very fond of. Number 3. So I had to really debate between two lenses for number 3. And those two lenses were both Nikon Z mount, the 24-120 f4 and the 24-70 2.8. And ultimately, I like the shots that I took with the 24-70 more. And so it's the number 3 on this list. This lens, I always had a bad attitude about 24-70s. I felt like they didn't really zoom in on that far. They're kind of big and heavy. They never were, they don't tend to have the oomph of sharpness that the 7200s do. I feel like the 7200s are always kind of the flagship lens of a brand, the 2.8s. And the 24-70s are always good, but I never felt like they had that oomph factor until I tried out the Nikon Z 24-70. This lens it has a look, and that's something that you just don't get very often from modern lenses, especially modern zooms. And once again, it's another one of those examples where I took a lot of shots that I'm really fond of. If you have the 24-120 from Nikon, that is a fantastic lens. Their sharpness is very similar. There's a lot that's really good. But at the end of the day, of the lenses that I'm really fond of, the 24-70 2.8 is one of my, it's my favorite Nikon lens, I think, that I've used. So yeah, and it's the top Nikon lens on this list. Okay, we are to the top 2. Before we do the top 2, there's a couple things. One, these lenses really should be 1A and 1B. I really had a hard time choosing between. One of them's more of like an emotional choice because it hit a point in my career that I was really it really kind of changed, where I was shooting. I was starting to get the photographs that I was kind of picturing in my head, and I was really starting to change, and I felt like I was really growing as a photographer. And the other one is from a technical standpoint, a usability standpoint, has just continued to blow my mind the more I've used it. It's both lenses that I want to own at some point. But before I reveal my top two, I do want to do an honorable mention. And it's an important honorable mention because it probably is my favorite lens overall that I've ever used. I just haven't used it enough for landscape photography to really rank it on this list. And that is the 28 f1.7 Summilux that is attached to the Leica Q2 and Q3. That lens, it's everything that you want out of a lens. It has character, it has sharpness, it has 3D pop. And while I haven't gotten to use that lens for landscape photography, I have gotten to use that lens and the camera attached to it for some other really important moments in my life. And I had to sell my Q2 for business reasons. And I'm really sad about that. And I'm going to get another one as soon as I can. But that 28 on that Leica Q2 and then now the Q3, it's a magic lens. I don't know how else to say it. And I had to talk about it on this video. I've only shot a couple of landscapes with it, but trust me when I say that I'm going to get my hands on it again. I love that lens. So it would be probably number one if I had shot even just a few more landscapes with it. But anyway, so that is the honorable mention on this list. Okay, so let's do number two, and that is the 7200 f4 from Sony. The original one. Now, I have Sony's new one. I just published a review of it a couple weeks ago, and I love this lens. It's a better lens in every way, but as far as ranking my favorite lenses, the 7200 f4 from Sony, it was just, like I said, it hit a point in my photography where I really grew, and I used that lens on some really special shoots. I captured some of my favorite images with that lens. I caught the halo on Long's Peak with that lens. I took that lens on my honeymoon and shot the Tetons with it. We had a fall day down in the San Juans where it just was it was a landscape photography dream day, and I used that lens. I just have so many fond memories of that lens. I can't help but have that be the lens on this list, even though, like, if I'd had this lens at the time, of course, this would have been it. That lens was such a good lens, and it, even if you can't, they're cheaper now. So, because there's this lens now, you could probably pick one up for less expensive, and it just is such a killer landscape photography lens. And yeah, that's number two on this list. Like I said, kind of 1A, 1B situation, but so here we are at number one time. But before I reveal what number one is, I would really help this channel out if you would hit the like button and subscribe. We are growing this channel, and we are, as you can see from this video, we don't have super strong brand loyalties. Right now, I'm shooting with the A7R5, but I'm not necessarily a Sony shooter per se. And so we're going to have content for so many different cameras, so many different camera brands out. And we would love for you to subscribe and come on the journey with us as we continue to develop our own landscape photography skills and share what we have learned over the years. So if you have followed my opinions and thoughts on this channel, you probably have guessed what number one is, and that is the Canon 100 to 500, 4.5 to 5.6. This lens, I kind of have to put it at number one because there's never been a lens that I felt like has blown me away in all regards. It's the size of a 7200 2.8 or a 100 to 400. It somehow has 100 more millimeters. It goes out to 500 than a standard 100 to 400. And it is incredibly sharp through the whole focal range. Like whether you're shooting at 100 or shooting at 300 or shooting at 500, it has a biting, great sharpness to it and a render to it. the stabilization is absolutely unbelievable on this lens. And I shot it handheld at 500 and got amazing shots. Somehow I had the least problems with atmospheric distortion with this lens. I don't know what Canon did. I don't know what kind of voodoo magic they put into this lens, but it really is. So right now I'm shooting with Sony, so I don't have this lens in-house. Eventually this one's gonna have to make its way back into my landscape photography bag. It's just, I mean, it'd be worth having just a Canon body that was permanently married to it. I love this lens. I really want it back. And it's amazing. I'm so pleased with the results from this lens. It's just it's a work of art from Canon. So that is my favorite landscape photography lens. So like I said, we would love it if you would subscribe to this channel and like this video as we continue to grow. And I hope that you enjoyed this slightly different kind of video, talking about kind of my history with cameras and lenses. So with that, we'll see you on the next adventure.